Thanks for joining us today to think about the CARE Act and the assessment process. Going to go straight in and open with a reflective question. So I'd like you to just pause before we get into the main detail of today's session. And I'd like you to stop and think about the assessment and what do you think is the purpose of an assessment? There's lots of processes within the CARE Act, and it's really, really important as advocates that you're clear about which process you're in and what it is and what the outcome of that process is going to be. And it starts with assessment. Assessment is the very beginning. So I want us to be crystal clear that the purpose of an assessment isn't to make a care plan. It isn't to create a care plan or to say how somebody what support they need. It's definitely not about saying how they're going to have support, which often I think in Care Act it becomes. But the actual purpose of an assessment is to establish what the person's eligible needs are. And it really is as straightforward as that. It's not about care planning. The amount of times I've seen local authorities, they kind of bunch it together and they say, oh, yeah, we're assessing needs, we're making the care plan. Actually, the two very, very distinct processes with distinct features and different outcomes. You can't make a care plan until you've established the person's needs. It's kind of really, really logical if you think about it. So the assessment it's actually part of this kind of flow, if you like. If you think about the journey through adult social care, was that a bit scouse? Journey. Anyway, if you think about the journey through adult social care, it starts with assessment, which is asking that question: does the person have eligible needs? If they do, then we move on to planning, and the purpose of planning is to say how we're going to meet those needs. And then after planning, we move on to the review, which is to simply say, is the plan working? And if it isn't, then we might revise the care plan. So we go back to planning, or we might do a reassessment of needs if the person's needs have changed. I can't overemphasize how important this slide is. Honestly, all the time I see in local authorities, these three things get conflated. Just last week, I was in a meeting and the social worker was talking about assessment. And I said, but the person's being assessed. What's this process for? Oh, no, it's the review. And it's like, I held my breath. It was like, for goodness sake, they're totally different processes. We've got to have clarity over which one we're in. So as an advocate, please feel emboldened to check what process the local authority are inviting you in. It should be at the beginning, the assessment of needs, which is simply, and I'm sorry for repeating myself, it's simply to ask, does the person have eligible needs? I'm going to now talk you through how we work that out. But forgive me for really emphasising this, but it's so important. These three distinct processes that as an advocate you will be supporting people with. So, and I'm sorry if my face is covering some of the text up. I will read these out. The assessment process, the guidance that accompanies the CARE Act is really clear that the process has to be person-centred throughout. It must involve the person and support them to have choice and control. That's taken directly from the CARE Act guidance. Assessments, poor assessments are rushed. I mean, sometimes the local authority are doing assessments and don't even tell the person. I remember a few years ago, my own personal advocacy supporting an adult, and we rang up to get information about a self-assessment. And before long, I was on, the phone for maybe 10 minutes, and the person on the phone was asking me lots of questions, and I was like relaying them to my partner, and, is this what you want to say? And then all of a sudden I said to the person on the phone, are you doing the assessment? And she said, well, yes. And I said, well, no, we don't want the assessment on the phone. I'm ringing for information on self-assessment. I'd like you to delete everything. But it did it did tell me just how easy it is for the professionals, and sometimes this you might be an office worker, an admin person, who's doing like screening. There's no such thing as screening. They can't screen you for an assessment. Um, you either have an assessment or you don't. And the care actually really clear that they can't deny somebody an assessment. But I think that the point of what I'm sharing is to be very, very clear that it's about the person having choice and control. And as an advocate, of course, you're there to make sure that that happens. So some things that the Care Act guidance says about the assessment and might be relevant, not for every person that you're supporting, but certainly for some. So it says it must be carried out by an appropriately trained assessor. It doesn't have to be a social worker, but I think for the group of people that advocates often work with, where needs might be perhaps higher than other people, then we might expect a social worker to be appropriate. But it does have to be a trained assessor. So the example I gave you there of an office worker on the telephone, that's not appropriate. It does need to be a trained person. The assessment has to be provided to everyone. They can't screen people out. If you ask if there's an appearance of need for care and support, I think that's as simple as somebody saying, I've got needs for care and support. Then the local authority is obliged to assess that person. This third point is critical, and it explains that there are three questions that the assessment essentially asks. One is, does the person have an impairment or a disability? So it's about their adult needs. Two, does that mean that the person can't achieve a list of outcomes? And I will show you these outcomes in a moment. And then three, does that impact on their well-being? So there's three parts of that: needs, outcomes, and well-being. And that's the whole point of the assessment. What are the person's needs? Are the needs caused because of the outcomes? Sorry, because of the needs, does it mean that they can't achieve outcomes? And because of that, does that impact on well-being? Sorry about that jumble. Look at number 4. It must be carried out with involvement from the adult, and where appropriate, their carer or anyone else they nominate, and that includes an independent advocate. It's really important that local authorities are referring early and arranging advocacy early. There's no point getting an invitation to support somebody 3 days before the assessment. You need time to meet the person, support them, work out what they want to say, work out what type of assessment they want. You need time to do that. There is very strong case law about not involving advocacy. It's called Haringey. The local authority was Haringey. And in this, the local authority didn't provide the person with an advocate. And I mean, the case was about a lot of things, but this is the person bit for our discussion today. The local authority didn't arrange an advocate, and the judge basically said, you should have, and you didn't, and that was unlawful. Haringey's defence was, well, even if we did involve an advocate, the outcome would have been the same. And the judge essentially said, don't be stupid. How can you possibly tell? How can you possibly know that the outcome would be the same with the involvement of an advocate? And the judge in this case said, go away and redo the assessment. Now, where that's really significant is if you get involved in a late stage of somebody's kind of decision-making process and you're worried that the assessment process wasn't fair or done properly and they didn't involve advocacy, I think that's a really good opening and justification for you to go back and say, I must insist that you redo that assessment with advocacy. I don't think you have to do it routinely. So like if you get invited, say at the planning stage and say, well, why wasn't I invited at the assessment stage? I don't think you need to do it routinely. Obviously you might feedback and say, we should have been, but I don't think you need to make like a formal challenge unless the person was unhappy that you went there, or there are real failings in how that assessment was done, and then I think you've got a real strong case to get them to redo it. The next one is a beautiful phrase. The assessment must be appropriate and proportionate. I love these two words, appropriate and proportionate. What does that mean? Well, appropriate means if the person has a learning disability, then it needs to be done in a way using language and resources that's suitable, that's appropriate. So I wouldn't, easy read or time needs to be considered. It might not be done quickly, it might need to be done over a couple of visits. Proportionate, again, time, and if somebody struggles with concentration, then it might be more appropriate and proportionate to have that assessment done over a couple of visits rather than a 2-hour session. Proportionate and appropriate means, is it done by somebody who knows what they're doing? Is it done at a time in a place where the person feels comfortable and relaxed? That could be in their own home, or it could be their own home is the worst place to do it. They don't want people in their own home. So it's things like that. But it's a really, if you're worried about any proposals to do the assessment, that's the phrase I'd fall back on. Is this appropriate and is this proportionate? And if it's not, that's the phrase I'd be saying. I'm worried that it's not. And then the last point on this slide is that if the person has capacity and wants to, then they can carry out a self-assessment. And this is really important to help people take choice and control. And it's not something I see local authorities routinely kind of push and offer and encourage. But as an advocate, you can. And I've done lots of these where you are helping the person work through what their needs are and how their disability or impairment impacts on the outcomes. It's not to say that the person decides everything, but the idea is that they are in more control of that document. And once they do this self-assessment, then it goes off to a social worker to be formally assessed. And that can be online or it can be a paper-based. But I think the point here is that it's the person doing it for themselves rather than a third party assessing them. So it's perfect when the person has a good idea of their needs and has capacity and can express that, then it's really good. So moving on to the different types of assessment, and this isn't an exhaustive list, but these 5 are named in the Care Act guidance. So it's important that you know that there's a minimum. These are what the local authority should be offering. First one is a face-to-face assessment, and I think that's going to be the majority of your work. You are going to be supporting people who will need a face-to-face assessment, and that's where that trained assessor is going to come in. But you'll also be supporting people with a supported self-assessment. It's perfectly fine for the local authority to assess the person on the telephone or even for them to do it online. Perfectly fine. But it might not be appropriate and proportionate if the person's got a lot of complex needs or a lot of unknown needs, or perhaps it's the first assessment they've got and there's a lot of uncertainty. Then the phone assessment might not be suitable to kind of dig into that. And also if the impairment is about capacity or communication, then a phone assessment might be the kind of the worst choice, I suppose. A joint assessment is where the person's receiving support from different agencies. So that could be, health, or it could be, if you're particularly a young person, like education. And that's really just to and mental health. We see this a lot, don't we? People coming out of hospital where they'll have a 117 aftercare plan. It makes sense for the assessment to be the same assessment. No need to keep doing repeated ones. And then the last one is a combined assessment, and that's where the person has a carer who's having an assessment, and rather than doing the adult assessment and then the carer's assessment, it's done together. It's not going to be suitable for everyone, but it'll be certainly suitable for lots of people where their needs align. I've seen that done really positively for couples, where one partner is caring for the other partner and they just want the one assessment, and that makes a lot of sense. But these are, you don't have, you shouldn't be shoehorned into one of these. It should be like an offer if these are the type, and as an advocate you can help the person understand which ones. So I'm going to now show you the outcomes, and this is a really critical list. If you're providing advocacy through Care Act processes I would strongly urge you to print this off, get it laminated, and put it in your toolkit, because you need to be going through this with your partners when you're supporting them through the assessment process. But if I just talk you through them first, what the Care Act says is that for a person to have eligible needs, their disability or impairment must have an impact on their ability to do these outcomes. And you have eligible needs if two or more of these outcomes you can't do because of your impairment or disability. And a little note to the phrase can't do. Yes, it means that I'm unable to do it. So maintaining nutrition. So can I feed myself? Can I cook? Can I shop for food? Do I remember to eat? Now, if I have, let's think of a condition. So let's say I have dementia and I forget to cook. I forget when I've eaten and I'll skip meals. Then that my impairment to the dementia and the way it impacts on me means that I'm unable to manage my nutrition. Does that make sense? So I can't do it without support. But let's say actually nutrition's quite a not a great example. Let me go to maintaining a safe house, a habitable environment. So let's say I have a condition that means, you know, maintaining the house, cleaning the house, doing the washing. Let's say I have MS, something like that, and I get very, very tired, and even walking up the stairs is very tiring. Or I have a physical disability that means walking up the stairs is painful, or moving around the house is painful. The local authority might say on the one hand, well, you can do it, she can do it, it just takes a bit longer. Well, the Care Act says that if it takes significantly longer or causes pain, then that should be treated as unable to achieve that outcome. And that's really, really important, because I think if you didn't know that, then the person might say, well, I can keep it clean, but I'm wiped out for 6 hours. I can't move. I'm on the couch. Well, that means that the person can't do it, without support, really. So very, very important to remember that. So let's have a little look at them. So nutrition is I mean, I think most of them are obvious, really. Nutrition, yeah, feeding yourself. Can you cook? Can you shop? Can you store food? I think some people with dementia, forget to eat. I remember speaking to somebody who they'd eat raw food or frozen food. There were risks with putting frozen food in the microwave and not cooking it properly. All things like that. A friend of mine who's autistic used to really struggle going to the shops. He'd go to the shops and often freeze. He couldn't get out. End up leaving his shopping and just leaving, because the noise, the smells, the busyness would all impact on his ability to actually buy food. So these are the things that we might be thinking about with nutrition. Personal hygiene, bathing, showering, cleaning, washing your hair. I remember one family that the young adult didn't have any concept of portion size, so they would treat the shampoo like water, and if you gave them a bottle of shampoo, they would use the whole shampoo on on their hair, which was only about that big. But yeah, so it's things like that. Just can the person manage their hygiene? Do they remember to shower? Do they remember speaking to somebody who, yeah, they would just spend like an hour in the shower, a ridiculously long time in the shower. It wasn't particularly good, and certainly it was a bit too expensive with the gas bill. But it was, if you left the person, they'd just sit in the shower because they like the sensation. So all those things we're thinking about as advocates, is the person able to manage the hygiene. Managing toilet needs, so that could be remembering to go, remembering to finish as well. There are lots of families I've worked with who their loved one kind of gets a bit nervous about finishing going to the toilet, so they'll sit on the toilet for an hour, and that can cause physical problems. Do they need support with kind of cleaning themselves after they've used the toilet, physically getting on and off the toilet? And then, of course, there's some conditions where the person might need, there's risks like pica, where the person might want to eat the poo. So there's all things, as an advocate, we want to just be mindful of. Does this person, can the person go to the toilet by themselves, essentially? And that's physically as well as all the emotional, can they manage going to that by themselves? Being appropriately clothed, so dressing appropriate to the weather, dressing appropriate to outside and inside, shoes. And this isn't about personal choice. If you want to, if you want to wear your pajamas, it's fine. But it's about, if you go into the shops, you're putting your shoes and socks on and a coat if it's raining. It's those things. Making use of the home safely, yeah, so cleaning, but also putting things away. I remember an example given to me when I did my training was somebody putting an electric kettle on the gas cooker. That can be a bit dangerous. Leaving the door open, not locking up, leaving the windows open. Again, leaving the doors and windows open in the middle of winter. So all those things can the person. And again, this isn't about the person has to have a level of cleanliness. We're not, people. We all have different choices and preferences, don't we, about what our home should look like. It's not that. It's about can you use the home safely in the habitable environment. That if you think about things like hoarding, there is a level where it becomes so unsafe. But up until that level, well, people are free and have autonomy to live in their own space, in their own private family space. Yeah, I remember when I first came into social care, the social work assessment for families, it had something like, with the more than three dishes in the sink, and you think, that's most people's houses, isn't it? Does the carpet need hoovering? It's most people's houses. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about safety and is it habitable? Can somebody live here? So yeah. Next one is engaging in training, work, education, volunteering. And for this, I would just encourage you to really think big. Have aspirations with your partner. This isn't always what volunteering in the garden centre or the local charity shop. And in fact, just last week there was a bit of a hullabaloo with Waitrose. I think it was Waitrose who had been um, working with a young man, and he would volunteer his time, and he was great. He'd stack shelves, he'd help customers, but it was voluntary. And then his mum, I think, asked whether he could get paid, and they said no. And then there was all kinds of fallout about, well, why not? And then why is this man being volunteering like 10 hours of his life a week for 3 years? So, but nobody stopped from the company and said this person should be paid if they want to be. So it's things like that. Think about what the person wants to do with their life, what support they need. And if because of their impairment they're not able to do that, then that means that it's an eligible need. Accessing the local community services, so that might be getting on the bus, it might be going to the library, going to the leisure activities, sports. But can the person make use of those facilities safely and independently? And then the last one is the caring responsibilities. So that could be, I have children, but because of my disability, that means it's difficult for me to, take take them to school commitments or after school commitments. But it's not about like what you would expect as the standard level of parenting. It's about, because of my impairment, that makes it very difficult, or I'm unable to carry out that responsibility. It doesn't have to be children. That could be, I care for my partner, I care for my parent. You don't have to live with people to care for them. You might be doing shopping for your mom or for your brother, you might be visiting. if because of your disability impairment, it means that you can't do that, it's impacted on them, then that means it's eligible needs. Whew, important slide, that one. I think as an advocate, our role is to help the person have some visibility where we can, that these are the areas that the assessor is going to be talking to them about. It might be appropriate, I think in an ideal world, to sit down with your partner and go through them beforehand and help them to prepare what they want to say about all 10. And again, you don't have to have something under each of the 10. It's 2 or more that the person cannot achieve without support, in order for them to have eligible needs. Okay. Whew. Right. Next slide is carer needs. So for carers, the question is, because of my caring responsibilities, does that mean I'm unable to achieve one of these outcomes? So it's not 2, it's just 1. And the list is, because of my caring responsibility, does that mean I'm unable to carry out caring responsibilities for somebody else? So that could be, example for a child, or that could be for somebody else. It's similar then outcomes to the adult with care needs. Because I'm caring for my brother, does that mean I struggle to maintain my own home? Or because of his needs, I can't manage the home. Does it mean I struggle to have nutrition and eat and shop, relationships and education and work as well? So for a carer, it's just one of those. And then after the assessment, after the social worker, the assessor has gone through that process, they really need to give the person a copy of that assessment. And I suppose here I'd just pause and say, if the person lacks capacity, then there's a question there around how we support the person to understand the outcome. And as an advocate, is it appropriate for you to be given a copy of the assessment in order for you to check it? And that's what I'd be doing. I'd be checking to make sure that everything was captured, and that you feel that that's a fair reflection of the person and what they were saying. If the person has eligible needs, so that's 2 or more of the outcomes that they can't achieve, then 3 things have to happen. One is that the local authority has to prepare a care and support plan, if the person wants. They have to tell the person what needs they're going to meet, and if any of those needs can be met by direct payments. We know direct payments, the take up of direct payments is awfully low. It's like disgracefully low, and it's going lower every year, which we don't understand. As advocates, you're so perfectly placed to ensure people understand their right to a direct payment, and if it's suitable, to enjoy a direct payment, because it can really give flexibility. And then the third thing the local authority has to do is to help the person to decide how to have their needs met. And that's essentially the plan. So I'm going to go back to that earlier slide where we looked at the kind of the 3 steps. So the assessment is to establish if the person has eligible needs. So they are unable to meet 2 or more of the outcomes. If they do, then it moves on to planning. And the plan, at that point, we say, how are we going to meet these needs? So the person can't maintain the house safely, or they can't manage their own nutrition. Now we ask the question, well, what support does the person want? And in both of those examples, there's limitless ways of meeting that need. So that's the plan. So we're not doing that yet. We're doing that later. The assessment is simply saying, do they have eligible needs? But this would be the next stage as an advocate. This is like we're moving on to the planning, if that makes sense. But before we move on to the planning, there is one other assessment that the local authority will look at, and that is a financial assessment. So now that we've established the person has eligible needs, they will now say, well, do those needs have to be funded by the local authority, essentially? And there are regulations that I've put on the screen, and I'd encourage you to download them and keep them in your toolkit. And in the idea of this is to focus support on people with low incomes. Um, Please note that the figures in this haven't been changed for 10 years. So, you know, think of that what you will. Um, but I'm going to tell you what the regulations say rather than comment on them, if that's okay. Otherwise, we might be here for a few more hours. Um, but essentially, if the person has an income which is over £23,250, then they're not entitled. Sorry, the local authority isn't under a duty to cover the costs of that care and support. The local authority can choose to if they want to, and I think there are two boroughs in London that are not charging for adult care, um, but most other local authorities do, and I think it generates about. I was going to say 5 billion, but I fear I might be making that up. But there's a lot of money generated from local authorities charging people for care and support. And then, so if you think about the upper limit is £23,250, the lower limit is £14,250. So anything in between that, you will pay some. If your income is below £14,250, then you're not asked to contribute, and the local authority will cover the costs. Lots of benefits will take people into that threshold above 14,000. And PIP, there are quite complicated rules of disregarding elements of PIP, but some of it will be included as income, and it's called disregarded expenditure. Um, what I'm going to say for today, because we haven't got an hour to go through that, what I would say, and what I've done in the past when I've supported people through financial charging assessments, is to ask the local authority for their policy. And the local authority, under Section 4 of the Care Act, have a duty to provide information and advice to all of its citizens. Most local authorities will have that to hand, and then you can use that to go through the conversation with your partner. But I think most people, certainly, in care assessments where local authority provide lots of care, this will be a fairly straightforward process because they might not have income. There are certain things that they cannot, the local authority cannot charge for, and one of them is for mental health aftercare. So, regardless of somebody's income, if they're coming out of hospital, if they've been detained under the Mental Health Act, and they're receiving care under Section 117, then that cannot be charged for, regardless how much that is, or how much the person's income is. And that's really important, to as an advocate, to check, that if they are the 117 is covering that. Other things that cannot be charged for is reablement. So that's particularly important if the person's coming out of hospital, and they might, like a general hospital, the classic scenario would be somebody who's had a hip replacement and they need some extra OT or practical support at home. That's not charged for 6 weeks. And there's been quite a few ombudsman rulings where the local authority has charged, and they've had to pay that back to the person. That's not right. Any kind of community equipment, so like minor aids, a minor adaptation, anything costing under £1,000. I think the thinking is it'll cost more to go through the assessment and the planning process, and the financial, doing all that's going to cost more than £1,000 just to arrange for that adaptation. And a good example of this is handrails. If the person, I'm familiar with a shocking story of somebody just wanted handrails, and they had to go through like a 6-hour, 40-page assessment just to buy some handrails that they were £100, couple of £100. That should just be provided without going through the kind of the charging. The Care Act guidance says that anybody who's diagnosed with CJD, their support is free. I don't know the background to that, but that's there. Aftercare we've talked about. And then there's something in the Care Act that says you can't charge to assess somebody for their needs. And I've never come across that, so I think that's fairly straightforward. Okay, we're getting to the end. One more slide, and this is really thinking about the advocacy functions now. So, as an advocate, where should your mind and heart be focused when you get that invitation, that referral to work with somebody through an assessment process? Well, not in any particular order, but I would be thinking who else is involved in the person's life, who else knows the person, what's their level of capacity. Is this somebody who's able to take a lead in their assessment, or is it somebody who needs a lot of support and representation because they lack capacity to make decisions around their needs? But I'll be spending a little bit of time just trying to understand the family, the dynamic and who's around this person. I'd be thinking about the type of assessment that the person might want, and if it's appropriate, I'd be talking to them about a self-assessment. Um, I'd mention that along the line there will be a financial assessment that can put people off. One of the things, if the person does have income above that £23,250 level, is the local authority can still make the care plan. They can still have a care plan, and the local authority can help them to source the support. But it just means actually paying for it would sit with the individual, not the local authority. So there's still, different people might have different needs, and somebody might have that level of income, but still want the local authority to help them with a plan and help them to decide what the plan is. I'll be thinking about reasonable adjustments. So think about that appropriate proportionate phrase. Does the person require a specialist assessor? Do they need it to be done in a certain place? Does there need to be easy read material? Does it need to be a series of meetings rather than one long meeting? Any adjustment. I'd be thinking when I'm going to meet my partner, is there anything here that would make it better? Well-being needs to be captured in the assessment process. So even though it's not one of the 10 outcomes, I would absolutely be asking my partner about their well-being. And depending on their capacity, I might use the phrase well-being or I might not. But essentially, well-being is what makes you happy. What gives you joy? What gives you that feeling of wanting to get out of bed today because I'm looking forward to going shopping or seeing friends or my dog's waking me up. What? We've all got a different idea of well-being, and I think it's a lovely place to start as an advocate when you're talking to your partner. Um, yeah, what is that for them? Is it? And for lots of people, it's not. It doesn't even cost money. It's the dog, or it's the garden, or it's being able to go for a walk in the morning, or it's going to church. Um, Sometimes it might cost money, like it's going to the football. That's my identity, that's my community. I go to football every other weekend. What is it? So as an advocate, I'm starting to think about that and talking to my partner about it. I'm definitely going to go through the outcomes where I can. So those 10 outcomes, I'm going to share that with my partner and invite them to think, which of these do I struggle with? Which do I find difficult? And I think you need to do that really sensitively, actually. You need to do that carefully because um, the language matters and we don't want people to feel, unable or less than. We want to have an honest conversation about what they might find difficult. And I think, you need to judge that, don't you, on the day. And then the final thing I'd be doing is next steps. So what the person can expect after the assessment, what they can expect during the assessment. But my focus would be to really help them to think, what are their needs? What are their eligible needs? So I'm going to leave it there. I will leave you in the awesome hands of Jane to go through any questions and any discussions. If you wanted some discussion points, discussion questions, I would suggest you share any of your experiences about assessments. So when they've gone really well, what does that look like? And then do the opposite. You could think about what are the painful experiences, and as an advocate, what's our role? So yeah, hope that's for some discussion, and enjoy the rest of the session today. Okay, see you soon, guys. Bye bye.